Bonsoir, good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Florian Martin. I'm the director of the Center for Law, Technology and Society at the University of Ottawa, where I am also an associate professor in the Faculty of Law Commerce section and the University Research Chair in Technology and Society. I'm delighted to welcome you all tonight for the 2026 Ian Kerr Memorial Lecture, celebrating the legacy of our missed friends and colleague, Ian. Lorsque nous nous réunissons pour un événement comme celui-ci, nous avons coutume d'offrir une information autochtone en appui aux efforts de réconciliation. We pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in these regions from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. Nous reconnaissons les gardiennes et gardiens des savoirs traditionnels de tout âge. Such an acknowledgement is even more important as we address technology policy issues in a time where digital tools can be used to perpetuate oppression, especially for Indigenous communities, especially on social media and on large language models, as we've seen lately in the news. And so ce soir, nous rendons hommage à notre des collègues, le professeur Ian Kerr, un mentor, un collègue, un enseignant, un ami, qui avait à cœur ces questions. I'm delighted to welcome you to this lecture designed to commemorate Ian by welcoming distinguished thinkers from around the world to share innovative ideas on important topics of interest on current and future technological issues. All those who had the great pleasure to work or meet Ian know that what a remarkable legacy he leaves behind. Ian was the Canada Research Chair in Ethics, Law and Technology at the University of Ottawa. He identified the need to examine the legal and ethical implications of technology years before these issues emerged as leading social concerns. His career spanned a myriad of law and policy challenges, including robots, AI, privacy, surveillance, algorithms, and minerals. In a time where people and leaders are finally starting to acknowledge issues regarding privacy and algorithms, Ian was already writing about this 30 years ago. Our world and our policies would be quite different today if people had listened, and I think I can say we miss him today, and we would love to have him on CBC tonight to discuss the latest cases. Ian était un pédagogue hors pair, un chercheur de classe mondiale, un collègue dévoué, un ami, un mentor généreux. Il était largement reconnu comme doté d'un talent extraordinaire, dont l'influence sur les étudiants, les professeurs et son domaine se fait encore sentir et se fera sentir encore pendant des décennies. In the policy realm, his work was quoted by the Supreme Court of Canada, by politicians in the House of Commons and the Senate, and in numerous government reports. His generosity, warmth, and good humor touched the lives of thousands of people. Whether national privacy commissioners or first-year law students, he made time for everyone, offering encouragement, insights, and was very, very supportive of everybody and wanted all of us to help shape a better collective digital future. Ian took care of junior scholars, pushing them to change the status quo, supporting and welcoming diverse voices in law and tech academia, notably women and queer voices, and build a stronger, better, and more inclusive community. À l'Université d'Ottawa, c'est un bâtisseur exceptionnel, jouant un rôle clé dans la création de notre programme de maîtrise en droit et technologie, et aussi dans la création de ce qui est aujourd'hui le centre de recherche en droit, technologie et société de l'Université d'Ottawa. Today, the Center for Law, Technology and Society is Canada's premier research group on technology, law, ethics, and policy. For more than 25 years, our group has been leading global conversation on the impact of technology on society and fundamental rights in an effort to shape policies for better future in digital context. Hosting a record number of Canada Research Chair and University Research Chair, the Center brings together in an interdisciplinary setting 29 professors from the faculties of law, engineering, arts, and social sciences, and more than 150 fellow researchers and students. And as mentioned by the president last fall, we're proud to have contributed, especially with our amazing students, to raise the profile of the University of Ottawa, who ranked third in Canada in terms of awards and fifth in terms of research intensity and research on technology policy. To honor Jan's memory, we have established the Jan Kerr Memorial Fund. I was afraid I would forget to click on this. We have created the fund to continue with remarkable legacy and support cutting-edge research in the fields of technology, law, ethics, and policy, and bring amazing students to UOL. We invite you to give today, tomorrow, and tomorrow again. You have QR code on the screen in the room to facilitate your donation. Et le fonds soutient les étudiants, notamment par le biais des bourses Jan Kerr pour la maîtrise en droit et technologie, afin d'offrir des bourses d'études supérieures aux personnes issues d'origines ou de perspectives non traditionnelles ou de l'étranger. The Kerr Fund also supports initiatives such as tonight's Kerr Memorial Lecture, a high-level event series to enable distinguished speakers from around the world to come share their ideas. And tonight, I'm delighted to welcome to the University of Ottawa Professor Megleta Jones to deliver the Jan Kerr Memorial Lecture, who was a dear friend of Jan, and we actually delighted to finally have you with us on campus. I know that you're one of the first things that Jan mentioned to me when I became director of someone he wanted to bring to campus. And so for those who don't know her, Professor Megleta Jones is the Provost Distinguished Associate Professor in the Communication, Culture and Technology program at Georgetown University. Her first book, Control Z, The Right to be Forgotten, explores the social, legal and technical issues surrounding digital oblivion. Most recently, she published The Character of Consent, The History of Cookies and Future of Technology Policy, which tells the history of digital consent through the lens of familiar technical objects. Her current work focuses on family technology policy ranging from age verification to social media and reproductive data privacy to elder care, AI chatbot, and family history platforms. It has been like in the headlines in the last few days and few weeks. So tonight she will discuss how technology can trigger moral panic and reflect on the policy choices our societies are making or aim to make. And something quite exceptional, for those who might know, so before passing, Jan had an amazing project of creating a graphic novel to unpack the complex issues at the interface of robotics, AI, and privacy for the general public, but also for academics. He never was able to complete, unfortunately, this project before passing. And so tonight, Professor Jones does get us an amazing gift. You have it on your tables in the room. She proposed a graphic novel for us to discuss moral panic and technology, and she will use it as a support for our lecture tonight. So I invite you to go through this amazing creative art tonight. Thank you again, Mike, for being with us tonight, despite the weather and all of the issues with lights currently in the world, and for this amazing day. And we'll go to you to deliver your lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for inviting me. I am so thrilled to be talking to you all. It is truly an honor to be speaking at the Ian Kerr Memorial Lecture. Ian meant a great deal to me. His work shaped how I understand and approach technology and law. His career and work inspired me. He gave me personally so much encouragement and insight, and then I watched him do it to everybody else. But I loved talking to Ian about everything. I thought he was an incredible dad and a mentor. Politics and high education. So what I plan to do tonight is to talk to you all, his fellow Canadians, about what I wish I could talk to him about now. The conversation that I wish I could have with him. And then at the end, you can do what Ian always did, which was nicely and sympathetically tell me that Canada doesn't really have that problem, or you guys solved it a long time ago. Now, as Florian mentioned, Ian was working on this really cool graphic novel project, and when we were talking about it, this was many years ago, I told him that I was also thinking about comics because I had decided I was a terrible writer and that I was only going to draw pictures in like 1 or 2 boxes, and that was like all I had. He like talked me off the ledge, and I wrote a book. Then I'm not a terrible writer. I'm a mediocre writer, but really fell in love with cartoons. So after Ian passed, I actually ended up going to like full cartoon school and have been making comics for a couple of years, and it's such a joy, and as ridiculous as it seems up against like a 100-page law review article, I kind of think that Ian would dig it. Like I think of all the people who would get this, I feel like Ian would, he would get it. So this is like a little bit of a read aloud. Like you guys have a comic version in your hand of the talk that I'm going to give and the thoughts that I've been working through on this subject. So what do I wish I could talk to Ian about right now? I wish that I could talk to him about kids and tech and moral panics. Because I am freaking out a bit. I think that is an okay thing to say. As an academic, I am trying to keep up with the relentless onslaught of fast-moving research and literatures in different disciplines that are studying the effects of technology on children. That means reading Jonathan Haidt, who argues in the anxious generation that we have overprotected kids offline and catastrophically underprotected them online. It means reading Nicholas Carr's Superbloom and Claire Morell's The Tech Exit, books with titles like Against the Machine and How to Reset Your Child's Brain. Jared Cooney Harvest is the kind of most recent, like trendy author. He recently told Congress, his book is called The Digital Delusion. He recently told Congress that Gen Z is the first generation in modern history to underperform the previous generation in every cognitive measure. Literacy, numeracy, attention, executive function, IQ. And as a mom, I'm executive function, I need that to be working a little bit better. So also as a mom, I talk to other parents all the time about this, and this is a very common subject. People often tell me about like what exactly they do and all of their screen time measures when they start talking about this, and they're worried. They don't want their kids to be exposed to something that's disturbing or cut their kids' childhood even just a little bit shorter. They don't want their kids to be lonely or losers, and trying to resolve that can take you in a lot of different directions. And there's some coordination and parent coordination, but families are kind of operating at different pieces, and so coordination is not, like we haven't quite figured out the form of coordination. And then as a human being and a citizen who votes, I can't unsee the news and the tragic stories that seem to come out weekly. The New York Times coverage of 16-year-old Adam Rain's suicide was heartbreaking. Adam started using ChatGPT for schoolwork. Then he started talking to him about his life. Then he started sharing plans to end his life. And then chatbot isolated him from his family and gave him specific feedback on the noose design and told him to not leave it out so that maybe his mom would find it when Adam suggested that that might be a good idea. This is like almost old news. Just since the start of this year, there's been another wave. On the legal front, you may have heard, the first bellwether trial in the massive social media addiction cases, the multi-district litigation began in Los Angeles Superior Court at the end of January, and yesterday the jury returned its verdict. They found Meta and YouTube negligent in designing and operating their platforms, concluding that the companies were aware their platforms had adverse effects on minors, but failed to adequately warn or do anything about it. This is a consolidated litigation involving thousands of people. There's another track of school districts. I think it's up to 1,000 school districts have sued these same companies, Meta, YouTube, Snap, and TikTok. And RAND data finds that as many as 13% of Americans between 12 and 21 are already using generative AI for mental health advice, and that is right at those peak years for the onset of psychosis. In Congress, the Senate Commerce Committee opened the year with a hearing where experts testified that AI companion apps now pose a greater risk to children than social media. The Senate then unanimously passed updates to our Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which is referred to as COPPA 2.0, extending some federal protections to teenagers. We didn't have any of those, giving them their own right to consent to data collection and banning targeted advertising to minors. On the House side, the Energy and Commerce Committee just cleared a sweeping package of bills covering social media, AI chatbots, online pornography, app stores, and parental control tools. It passed largely on party lines and is now headed to the floor. And then just last week, the White House released a draft national AI framework that includes reference to child protection, with the president's science advisor explicitly warning against a 50-state patchwork. So there is this wave, there is this big push, but every time I walk into a room of technologists or attend an industry event, it is a different world. The conversation will be like a panel, and the conversation opens warmly. Of course, we take this seriously. Of course, we understand why parents are worried and these tragedies, we've made some mistakes. But then before too long, somebody says, like flippantly, well, we don't want a moral panic. And then somebody brings up the radio, and they start talking about how, briefly, like there's a reference to radio addiction, and the printing press was gonna corrupt youth, and the telegraph was gonna destroy society, and we wanted to be in comic books, and every generation does this, there's panic and there's headlines, and then nothing happens, it's the same cycle, and we should get over it. I'm always sitting in those rooms, like looking around, being like, are you guys not panicking? Like, are you just a lot cooler than me? Like, how are we alive at the same time? But the rhetorical work that Moral Panic is doing in that room is really, really powerful. And it got me thinking that even if those kind of flippant examples are moral panics, history seems like it's full of technologies that we didn't panic enough about. Eugenics. People were pretty excited about eugenics. They had the full backing of the scientific community. It had a lot of social support in the United States. It resulted in the forced sterilization policies in 32 states that was upheld by the Supreme Court in Buck v. Bell in 1927, and Carrie Buck was one of 60,000 people that was forcefully sterilized against her will. And there's just not enough panic. Like when you read this story, you're like, there's not enough panic here. There's really no panic. Cigarettes also has this totally different trajectory than the moral panic one. We actually had 26 states that already banned the sale of cigarettes to minors in 1890, but then industry lobbied the age limits back down, and by the time that we had some understanding of what cigarettes were, it had a generation of addiction locked in, but also all of these cultural elements built around it. Plastics, I feel like, has a weird history too. I just think everybody was excited about plastics. Like maybe I'm wrong, but you watch like It's a Wonderful Life, you know, and they're like, he's in plastics, and it's it's like the golden child of the story. I think these were embraced largely with enthusiasm, and people were not asking what happens when we design material that lasts essentially forever and then build our entire economy around throwing it away. There's also all of these panics that I think we look back on fondly. child labor is like one. The photographs from Louis Hine that he took of children in mines and factories produced outrage that led to state labor codes and children going to school and the Children's Bureau, and finally the Fair Labor Standard Act of 1938. Children were catching fire and burning to death in these pajamas, and people freaked out about this earlier in the 20th century. And what followed was a bunch of lawsuits, and then the Flammable Fabric Acts, and tort law and regulatory reform expanded. We have very different expectations of what will happen when our kids put on pajamas now. Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, and Americans stopped trusting what they ate until we changed how meat was slaughtered, inspected, labeled, and sold. So, are these just great moral panics? What is a moral panic, actually? The term was popularized by Stanley Cohen in his 1972 book, Folk Devils and Moral Panics. Cohen was studying what happened in 1964 when two British youth subcultures, the mods and the rockers, brawled at seaside resorts. The media covered the heck out of it, and hundreds of arrests followed. The magistrate who presided over the case called them colorfully and memorably these long-haired, unkempt, mentally unstable, petty little sawdust Caesars who can only find courage hunting in packs like rats. Cohen identified the key actors, the group onto whom society projects its fear. Those are the folk devils. The powerful group that defines what counts as threats and demands something to be done with it. Those are the moral entrepreneurs. So that's our judge in the news in this case study. Much later, in 1994, sociology Eric Good and Nachman Ben Yehuda formalized the framework into this 5 criteria: concern, hostility, consensus, volatility, and most importantly, disproportionality. Meaning the reaction exceeds what evidence actually warrants. In practice, disproportionality became the only question anyone ever asked. The framework got turned into a diagnostic test where we were just asking, is this an overreaction? And that, of course, depends on who you ask, which isn't very useful. But if it is considered an overreaction, then it's also dismissed as a moral panic. And so that's how I think this has become part of the rhetoric of tech industry and tech industry events. Researchers have applied this kind of diagnostic version directly onto fears about children and the internet. In 2008, Alice Marwick coined the term techno-panic, applying the 5 criteria to fears about online predators on MySpace. She argued the actual statistical risk to children was being wildly overstated, that the folk devil was the online predators, and the moral entrepreneurs were this coalition of legislators and advocacy groups, and the result was bad policy built on conflated fears. She returned to this framework in 2024, looking at the current social media debates, and concluded that the current state of concerns around youth and social media meet the criteria of a moral panic, which is not a solid basis for legislation. Amy Orban's work on the Sisyphean, the guy moving the boulder up the hill, cycle of technology panics, which argues that every generation does this. Every generation restarts the same pattern without learning from the last. And Orban has produced some of the most cited work from we're blowing this out of proportion side, and that says digital technology it explains less than 0.4% of the variation in adolescent well-being, which is less than wearing glasses and less than eating potatoes regularly. But more has happened in panic studies since the 1990s. Some of the biggest contributions, and really the most helpful way to think about panics in recent years comes from Canadian Sean Hire. Hayer's core intervention is that Cohen's framework is used as a fairly unhelpful diagnostic tool. Either the reaction is proportionate or it isn't, but it seems like anyone can win, and it's not really that much of an interesting question for sociologists, which I think he is. Heyer sees moral panics as part of how democracies govern. His reframing is that moral panics are conventionally explained as socially regressive overreactions to objectively minor problems, but they are better understood as collective grievances that arise from the perceived crisis in the moral regulation of everyday life. I just want to pull out three pieces of that. Collective grievances, not irrational, not pathological, but a shared sense that something is broken. That evidence may be contested, but the grievance is a signal worth taking seriously. Instead of folk devils and moral entrepreneurs, Heyer has claim makers and counterclaim makers. Heyer's framework explicitly includes everyone participating in the debate as part of producing the ongoing governance. So Jonathan Haidt and the Surgeon General and Gavin Newsom, but also researchers who push back and moms in their neighborhoods and the PTO meeting and security experts who are writing letters about privacy risks, and Mark Zuckerberg testifying before the Senate saying that science does not support that social media is harming kids. Under Heyer's framework, Zuckerberg's testimony is not outside the panic, it's part of the panic. Counterclaiming is governance producing also. And this last piece, it focuses on the moral regulation of everyday life. When Heyer says that panic arises from this perception, he means something has happened to the infrastructure that was supposed to be managing it. So the entire governance apparatus can be pulled into this: laws, norms, parenting practices, platform defaults, school policies, judicial decisions. So Heyer does two more, I think, really helpful things to getting our footing here. Heyer notes that the internet really demands that we look at moral panics differently than the idea of a silent minority being outlandishly portrayed by the CBC. Online, there is no CBC controlling the narrative and no passive audience receiving it. Instead, millions of users are simultaneously generating claims, contesting claims, sharing them, and having them algorithmically amplified back at scale. The folk devil and the moral entrepreneur are no longer stable roles. It depends on where you're sitting. Everyone is a claim maker, and the platforms themselves are active participants in shaping where fears get traction and which don't. Heyer also identified something related that's specific about neoliberal political cultures and their response to panics. They tend to produce individualized risk management tools in response to panics. So in our case, parental controls, screen time apps, opt-out settings, disclosure. And so this response locates responsibility, solves the problem, locates responsibility in individuals and families rather than structural reforms in platforms or states. So, is this a moral panic? It sure is. The current concern over kids online is a moral panic. I think in Heyer's sense, a collective grievance arising from a perceived breakdown in the moral regulation of childhood in the digital age. We've got an articulated collective sense that something is wrong. Claim makers and counterclaim makers out there working hard, and rebuilding is certainly afoot. But one thing that's interesting is, especially in terms of Heyer's work, is that the neoliberal tools of yesteryear are part of the breakdown, so it's hard to understand them as solutions. And so sorting out where they go, depends on where you look at the claim makers, but I think it's one of the biggest differences about how this rebuilding is happening to some of the prior ones that we've looked at. So I'd like to look a little bit more closely at age verification. I'm not a panic studies person. That's not actually what my research is. I have spent a lot of the last 2 years on age verification and kids' online safety. And so the next set of pages are really where I actually live intellectually. In 2025 alone, over 45 states introduced more than 300 bills on children's online safety and privacy. Congress proposed more than a dozen pieces of legislation, and I'd like to walk through the landscape because I actually think the variety is really important. 25 US states now require pornographic websites to verify that users are 18 years or older. Florida has banned social media accounts entirely for children under 14, with parental consent required for 14 and 15-year-olds. And existing accounts belonging to minors have to be terminated. New York requires parental consent for algorithmic feeds for minors and bans notifications between midnight and 6 a.m. for users under 18. Connecticut has banned infinite scroll and other addictive features for minors, as well as unsolicited direct messages from adults. Virginia limits children under 16 to 1 hour on each social media platform per day. Maryland requires the highest privacy defaults for users under 16, bans location data collection, and mandates internal impact assessments. And Utah requires parental consent before minors can even download any apps. This sounds like, wow, we've got a lot. We are protecting all these kids in the United States, but all of this is in litigation. Like almost none of this is actually taken full effect because it's tied up in the courts. At the federal level, the Kids Online Safety Act would create a platform duty of care for minors and disable addictive features. The GUARD Act would ban AI companion chatbots entirely for minors under 18. And as I mentioned, the House is moving a package of partisan bills forward. And the main reason it's a partisan bill is because the Democrats object to the preemption language, which would limit the state's role in online kids protection. All of this legislative activity got a significant constitutional boost last summer when the Supreme Court revisited the legality of online age verification. We had sort of let this rest for decades since the late 90s. In 1997, in Reno v. ACLU, the court struck down federal attempts to restrict online speech to protect minors from pornography, applying strict scrutiny, which is our highest level, is our highest hurdle to pass. And then in 2004, so that law got struck down, so the Communications Decency Act, it got struck down, and so Congress went back and made changes, passed it again, and in 2004, in Ashcroft v. ACLU, the court struck it down again. And it said that parental filters are a less restrictive means for achieving basically the same goal. So for 2 decades, treating kids differently online than adults was just not really seen as a worthwhile tech policy effort. We weren't really talking about it. Then a new wave of concern arose with social media and some other things. There were some changes to politics. There were some political shifts that are happening, and the Supreme Court looks different. And so that's what we're living in right now and have been for a couple of years. In the summer of 2025, in Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton, the Supreme Court decided a challenge to Texas's law that required pornography websites to verify users are 18, and the court upheld the law in a 6-3 decision. Justice Thomas wrote the majority, and the big move that he made was declaring that age verification is only an incidental burden on adults' First Amendment rights. And a lot of this language in the case is tied back to well, we ask for people's IDs all the time in the real world. So there's these kind of instant, well, if it's okay, we've been doing this forever, we weren't giving those cases a lot of heightened scrutiny when we decided them in the 70s, they kind of got through no problem. Here he says, age verification is an incidental burden on adults' First Amendment rights. Minors have no constitutional rights to pornography. It's categorically obscene, so don't need to worry about that. So the court decided that the appropriate test was this intermediate scrutiny, which I think is going to be built out a lot over the next couple of years, but not strict scrutiny. So the court only had to ask, does the law advance an important government interest without being substantially more burdensome than necessary? Texas's law did not have to be the least restrictive option for keeping kids safe online, as it would have been under strict scrutiny. What I think is more interesting for analyzing moral panics is the framework that Thomas articulated. And that is that when states have traditional authority to regulate an activity involving children, they can use ordinary and appropriate means to enforce that regulation. And age verification was decided to be an ordinary and appropriate means. I'm going to come back to that in a second. I just want to give Kagan's dissent a little shout out. Justice Kagan dissented sharply. She would have kept strict scrutiny as the standard. She wrote that the Texas law is a direct regulation of speech triggered by the amount of sexually explicit expression on a commercial website. Now, in earlier cases, the availability of parental filters was pretty much doomed for online age verification laws, but she was not saying that these laws would not pass strict scrutiny. She was saying that they should have applied strict scrutiny and was disappointed that the court did not rely on its own precedents. The impact is that the 25 states with age verification for pornography sites now sit on firm constitutional grounds. But the larger significance, I think, is whether the ordinary and appropriate means doctrine extends beyond pornography. Commenters rushed to say the decision was narrow, which I think was a little bit of wishful thinking, and that was limited to content that is obscene for minors. But Thomas's logic doesn't necessarily stop at pornography. If it asks, does the state have traditional authority to regulate this activity for children? And if yes, age verification is a fine enforcement. So I asked myself, what else does the state have traditional authority to regulate around kids? And it's been really helpful for me to put these into buckets. So I hope this is helpful for you guys too. I have identified these three categories for sort of how we have thought about this in kind of modern times. The first category are outright bans. These are activities that children simply cannot do, regardless of parent preference: tobacco, alcohol, gambling, voting. These are activities with no legitimate developmental benefits to minors, or where the risk of addiction or long-term harm is quite severe, or where children lack the capacity that the activity requires, or where parental permission and oversight have proven consistently to be ineffective as protection. And courts have generally upheld these, though the handful of social media bans for under 14 that treat TikTok like alcohol have gotten inconsistent outcomes in court, which I'll come back to a little bit later. The second category is parental consent. So we've got outright bans, and then we've got parental oversight. And these are activities children can do, but only with a parent's explicit permission. Sports, piercings, medical procedures, driving, working. These are activities with real risks, but clear developmental benefits, and where parents can meaningfully assess and manage the potential harm. Many of the proposed laws requiring parental consent for accounts, or for the accounts to be linked to a parent, might fit into this way of thinking. The third category is just unrestricted access, where children and adults are treated the same legally, but we rely on education and culture to differentiate where appropriate, because harms are speculative or contested, or because education and disclosures are sufficient, or because the activity is tied to identity exploration that courts have been reluctant to restrict. Much of the internet under pre-Paxton doctrine fell here. And so the fights now, what I think the work that the panic, that we're doing inside the panic now, is figuring out which bucket the new digital behaviors should fall into. Social media is seen as the most problematic. It's like the biggest target, but it's not obscene, like all of it's not obscene to minors, so would need to be an extension of Paxton. The question courts are fighting over is whether Paxton's intermediate scrutiny holding can be detached from its obscenity reasoning and applied to design features instead. And we've seen a little bit of that design scrutiny in these jury verdicts that have come down. Florida and Louisiana's law got very different treatment as it worked up through the circuit courts. So I think that we are going to see a circuit split. on this issue, so I think it's moving its way to the top of the list, and I think that the Supreme Court will be excited to hear it. AI chatbots will likely follow a similar trajectory. You notice that the way people talk about chatbots is often like the next generation of social media, and that's how we're gonna think about it. But it does have some powerful differences that may more squarely fall within traditional state authority around intimate relationships or mental health risks. Some of the most interesting efforts are about where age verification goes. Does it go at the operating system level, at the app store level, at the platform level, at the app level, or at the feature level? And some of these tie parental consent to a child's inability to consent, like under state law, or their inability to agree to contracts. So they sort of try to fit it into that framework when they talk about the bills. All of this leads eventually to one big constitutional question that I think is fascinating, and I'm excited to watch courts develop it, and that is, what First Amendment rights do children have independent of their parents? We don't have a lot of cases on this in the United States. We have a robust body of cases that come from schools and children's rights to expression in schools and what you can't punish them for. But Brown v. EMA is it's the case to watch on this. It's one of the few cases we have about it, but it's also about video games. And this is a case where California had attempted to require parental consent for minors to buy violent video games. The court struck down that law as unconstitutional, and Justice Scalia wrote the majority, but Justice Thomas wrote in dissent wrote full dissent, and he wrote that children have no First Amendment rights. Their parents do not wish them to exercise. He was pretty clear about that, but he lost. But even some that concurred in the majority, including Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito, signaled that there could be a path forward for more carefully crafted legislation like this. So the courts and legislation are really just the most visible part, I think, of the panic, like the most solid thing to point to and look at. When the infrastructure is perceived to have failed, though, everything kind of gets mobilized. Maybe not everything, but lots of things get mobilized. There's a lot of moving parts and people, and how we panic matters. So arguing over whether the effect size clears the bar of statistical significance in a certain study, or whether any given study sample size is adequate, is really not what we're talking about. I feel like that's like arguing about the ice maker being broken, and you're like, it's always broken, and your partner's like, no, it works sometimes, but really what you're trying to do is remodel the kitchen. Like really with the conversation, it's this like odd, clunky way that we're trying to have the conversation around research, but really we're trying to ask ourselves, do we need to remodel? I want to remodel the kitchen, honey. Come on, get on board. So I think this is definitely a moral panic. By higher standards, we've got a collective grievance, we've got a perceived breakdown in the moral regulation of everyday life, we've got claims and counterclaims producing active governance. And calling it that does not dismiss it. I do not mean to dismiss it, quite the opposite. We are remodeling the kitchen, and I think we should figure out how to do it well. So, on reflecting on how you do that well, the three things that I've been thinking a lot about are, first, building bridges to answer big questions. So like getting away from the ice maker. And I think that we can do that, the ice maker, yeah, getting away, pulling ourselves out of kind of the research debates, and coming up with a couple more like litmus test questions to figure out where we agree with people. And one of the most fruitful ones that I have come up with is, should kids be treated differently than adults online? If you have consensus on that, you can kind of move on. But if you don't have consensus on that, talking about these specific research details, it's like you're not even on the same wavelength. And you need to have a different conversation if you're saying, oh, I think kids should be treated differently online, and the person that you're talking to is like, no, that's a terrible idea. Most of the people that I talk to these days, their answer is yes to that question, and then you get to ask them about what role that they think parents can play, or what role they'd like to play as a parent. Oftentimes they're like, I don't want to play a role. Most of my parent friends are like, no thank you, I would like to not do this job anymore. Can we just get a band? You know, can I please get me away from the buttons? That's a very helpful insight. Like, what role would you like to play in this? Allows people, I think, to think through what they're really capable of and what we can possibly do. I think another helpful litmus question is, do you think kids have a right to access stuff or do stuff against their parents' wishes? You mean, again, we're like moving down here, get in the weeds. I think we're still above the dirt. But there are some litmus test questions that I think are much more helpful for remodeling the kitchen. I feel like this was a bad analogy to go down, but for remodeling the kitchen, that would help us quite a bit more. The second thing that I'm very focused on is building excellent infrastructure. One of the things that Hire says is that moral panics produce these long-term things, even if they feel like these short-term moments. We're very narrowly focused on something, but we build something through these panics that has long-lasting effects, and I'm excited about long-lasting effects. I want to think about them like that. So one of the great risks of this moment is that urgency produces bad architecture, and I think if you're a parent, it feels so urgent all the time, and I don't mean to say that it can't be done fast. I just mean I don't want a Band-Aid. I want to build something good and special that works really well. Age verification systems could absolutely be massive surveillance databases. Parental consent could definitely be just trivially circumvented by a 10-year-old who's guessing their parent's password. Bans could be sweeping into only specific it could be strategically leaving out certain categories of tech companies. And so building it right takes ambition and vision, and not just urgency. I think it also takes urgency, but building it right takes ambition and vision. And what I'm really hoping is that tech companies that are great at ambition and vision will stop dragging their feet and sort of get on board and build something that works, that users want, that is seamless and beautiful, and honestly works with all the stuff they already do. And so I think they are part of this. They're an essential part of this second component to doing this well. Third, we need to build safeguards against abuse. I think one of the things that the privileged people are just as guilty of is being dismissive of concerns around abuse. And those should absolutely be taken seriously. The ordinary and appropriate means doctrine that Thomas articulated in Paxton is a powerful constitutional lever. It could be used to build a genuinely safer internet for kids, but it could also be used to further exacerbate privacy abuses, or to put laws that seem like they protect kids, but actually they just give tech companies protection to not pay any attention for kids. There are certainly bills out there that is how I would describe them. So laws need to provide limitations around age verification, and they also need to provide teeth around age verification. Judicial scrutiny. That test needs to also be able to catch pretextual uses and shut them down. That intermediary test needs to be able to catch real government interests that are actually being furthered by using these tools. So of course we are in a moral panic, not in the dismissive sense, not in an overreaction, move on, but in higher sense. And mobilization has already started. The rebuilding, I think, has already started in courts and legislators and platforms around the country with parents and researchers and kids. And as Hire reminds us, moral panics produce long-lasting governance. So let's ask good questions, let's build the vision, and watch out for abuses, and let's make this the best moral panic ever. So I want to just close with the person we're here to remember. Ian said, whether the subject is law, philosophy, or technology, the issues always lend themselves to a dialogue. Ian was, by every account of everyone who knew him, someone who invited that dialogue. He made the room bigger, he made questions feel alive, and he was so welcoming. So I'd now like to welcome the audience into a dialogue. I'd love to talk about anything you guys want to talk about. I feel like at least at some point I said something in this talk related to whatever is going on in Canada, AI and chatbots and social media. And I didn't say Bitcoin, I'll say it now. Bitcoin, blockchain, quantum, where's Florian? Quantum, yeah, so whatever you would like to talk about, whatever is on your mind, and please just tell me how. I would love it if Canada didn't have any of these problems, or you guys solved it 10 years ago. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Meg. That was an amazing lecture. I don't think we solved any of those issues.
Okay, that's too bad.
And I think we kind of even like we're behind lately on those.
Lately, okay. You can leave, Rob.
Let's see. So we have 2 mics at the front for people to ask questions. Don't be shy. I'm sure. Yeah, please. Just come to the mics. There is one like at the bottom of each staircase, and you can ask your question. But maybe as we're waiting for the first question, could I hear you maybe about like the latest decision that we've seen in New Mexico and California?
Is that us together?
I think it's the mics. Yes. I think this one gets perfect. Yeah, so you could maybe like you touch upon like some of the key issues that has been discussed, like with the jury in those cases. So maybe like because we have similar cases ongoing in Canada, so we're looking at what's happening south of the border to maybe have some lessons learned and learning from the evidence being produced in court to hopefully be able to move the needle also here. Yeah,
that has been such a huge challenge to just getting cases in court. Just the transparency into showing what was happening and what companies knew. That's a big challenge, so I hope that serves a lot of policymakers and attorneys. I will say my theory of change is very American, and it is that hungry lawyers change the world. And so for me, this is how it happens. I think that the structure of the cases is really interesting. That we're in a law school, so I feel like I can do that, right? So there's the way that the thousands of these claims have been organized, I think is interesting and matters. That makes these jury decisions matter a lot to these other cases. So there's the JCCP, which is the state level. So there's the California, 1,000 cases at the California level. And then there's a federal level, another collection of thousands of cases there. At the federal level, you also have those school districts. That's one track, and then there's a set of AG tracks. And so the way that the system has structured this is the judges, in coordination with the attorneys, choose a handful of bellwether cases to give the participants basically like some idea of how or whether they should settle. So it's not a class action where the decision in that case it applies to all these other cases. They are just coordinated in this group in a very strange way. It seems like an interesting litigation formation to me. So you have them happening simultaneously. We don't have anything in the federal version. So the jury decision that we got was for that state version. So that will give an indication to all of those other plaintiffs and to Meta and YouTube about how they need to move forward with all of these other plaintiffs. So I think that is one really interesting. I also think that the response from the right, what is the right? I don't know what the right is. I can't even say that. I'm going to say social conservatives and the Wall Street Journal. Social conservatives in the Wall Street Journal, because I don't know what anybody is anymore, but I thought their response was really interesting, and it was basically like, oh my gosh, there's gonna be a flood of lawsuits. This is gonna be like big compliance-y cost, big cost to companies. And their response, these social conservatives, was like, why are we even doing this? Just ban it for kids, under a certain age. And so it's weird how you can like sort of get to the same place for different reasons, but there's a lot of other reasons why liberal parents, for instance, are like, I don't think these parental controls do anything. They're not doing what I want them to do as a parent. I wish they were just inaccessible tools. So I think it's a really big deal, and I think that there's a bunch of policy proposals that will be emboldened by this decision.
I agree with you. And also for what might happen in Canada, at least I want to be hopeful tonight. So.
Thank you very much. Am I supposed to say who I am or something?
Yes, maybe.
My name is Kim, and I'm a former student here at Ottawa U in economics, so just to let you know that. And what I'm interested in, is there a life cycle for moral panics? Not just ones in this field, but like everything, because of new technologies, because of new ways of thinking. And how does that life cycle go? What can we learn from that, from other moral panics? And is this time different?
Yeah, that is such an economics question. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't remember your name. What Kim? I should warn you before I answer, I have an allergy to economics, and I'm bad at it. So you would be able to find these beautiful life cycles in what you see. I do a lot of, so I draw cartoons and I work on some law stuff, and the other areas that I work on is history, so the history of technology. And I think when you do history, it's just like harder to see these patterns. It's harder to see these kind of, it's the same each time. I think that's one of the reasons that when I started thinking through these other historical supposed panics or other ways that like a new technology comes along, it just didn't map what was supposedly a moral panic, or we liked it. And so what I think I am holding on to, it does have a bit of a pattern, and that is that as moral panics are not how that's not normal governance. It's not like how we're normally going through. It is when things feel like they have fallen apart. It's like this spike in activity. And in the US, we've had there is a widely held perception that Congress has not been doing any, it's not been passing laws. I don't even think it matters if it's true. The perception is that, and so it goes into this we're not doing anything. So I think what the pattern that you see is you have this kind of normal going on, and then when you have this perceived sense of moral discomfort, you get this spike in activity that produces changes. So I don't think that maps necessarily onto a technological life cycle. You can imagine us doing great in society, and then AI comes on, and we're like, we got this. We're doing awesome. Just fold it right in. That does not seem. I don't know when that has quite happened, but we have had more stable times where they have more institutional trust. One of the biggest challenges, I think, to creative policy making today is that we have low institutional trust in the United States, and it just takes a bunch of policy tool options out of, they just can't even be considered. And so it really limits the kind of toolkit. So I apologize, Kim, it's my allergy that prevents me from answering you well.
And that's okay, my allergy to lawyers is not.
I don't know how you're surviving in here. Shouldn't you have hives and be sneezing?
I mean, I'm sitting in a room.
Yeah, we're surrounded.
I'm probably the only economist.
Wow.
So take what I said with a grain of salt, otherwise I wouldn't be here.
I'm here to defend lawyers.
Oh,
I never defend lawyers, actually. That's not something I do. First of all, thank you so much for that. I think Ian would have really appreciated this work and the graphic novel comic. So sort of years ago, Val Steves got me really interested in this idea of talking to kids, like actually asking kids what they thought. And I feel like I've kind of taken my lead since then from that. And I don't even remember when this was. One of the first times we went into the field to talk to kids in the e-girls project. Really what we said, well, what would you want policymakers to know? And they said, well, we're kind of wondering why everybody's focused on us and telling us what to do and what not to do. And nobody's talking to the tech corporations that, like, they were literally telling us this is how our environment is getting structured in this way that's setting us up for conflict. So they've known that this was, 18 years ago probably.
Yeah.
Kids have been saying this since then. And so where that's kind of led me over time is thinking, we can't fix it. It's broken, and we can't fix it just for kids. The thing underneath is rotten, and trying to patch it up for kids always leads me to think, okay, well, we'll protect them till they're 18 or whatever the case may be, and then we'll just unleash the shit, right? We'll just set them loose in this thing that we just have refused to try to fix.
Mm-hmm.
So my concern then winds up being it is for kids, but it's not just for kids, right? It's like all the marginalized communities who are particularly harmed by the way that the model functions.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder, and maybe it's just too big to think about, but I wonder if what sort of in this dialogue that you're talking about, maybe is this another trajectory that we could find ourselves on, where we're talking about trying to fix this not just for kids but for humanity.
I love this point because I think Jane and I already love Jane, we just met, but I think we see that, like, I think we have a different vision for the kitchen, Jane. Yeah, and so I think kids like ruin the internet. I would want to be an adult. I want the internet to be an adult space. I don't want it to be a place where I can't talk about adult things and politics and all of the things that I would never talk about in front of my kids. They should just go climb a tree, and so I am kind of okay with it being like the Vegas of, that's wrong, I actually think gambling has gotten wildly out of control, so let me pull that back, but I am okay with the internet being an adult space, for these things being adult devices, but I actually think of them less as alcohol or cigarettes, as rotten, but as adult responsibilities. Kids do insane things on the internet. They do insane things where you're like, whoa, I can't believe a child would even think of doing such a Zoom bombing a classmate's funeral. That's nuts, and adults do crazy things too. I don't mean to suggest that we're great, but these by all accounts are normal kids. They're gonna get suspended for this. When you look into these, they are not, they seem fairly normal besides that. And I like to think of it as driving or voting, where this should be integrated. We should be training people to enter this space that comes with a ton of responsibilities. It is dicey, and once you can vote, you are targeted as, a potential voter, you have responsibilities, all of these things. So my vision, my ideal vision, based on conversations that I've been having over the last year, is kind of this driver's license. We just do a better job of preparing kids to enter these spaces as adults, and they are marked as kind of places that are for adults. That's one vision. I'm also very convinced by a lot of other visions. I think that in the US we have big challenges with the idea of making the internet kid-friendly. like, we have First Amendment challenges to making the whole thing, like, just make the whole thing kid-friendly, I think is tough, you know, that's a tough thing for Americans to understand, who think that the First Amendment right means they can say heinous stuff without, you know, being punished by the government. So that's like a slightly different version, but also I totally agree with you that we are not engaging in these exploitative models that are also bad for adults. And we are all also suffering through our engagement with these exploitative systems. And I think we should also do something about that. And we are behind you guys on that front.
There's the gentleman just getting first.
Thank you. Okay, another question from the cheap seats, i.e. an outsider. I'm a cybersecurity professional, so I get slings and arrows from both the tech companies and my former profession, the philosophers. So I mentioned all some of the morally conscious lawyers in the room would take that up. And I never knew Ian. I just saw this lecture series by chance last year and started coming. So the reason I mention that is because one of the things you get in my profession, and I suspect this is true in general about the moral panic question, is that legislators, for example, or anybody else trying to pronounce on what the tech company should do, often go off and say something really, really technologically stupid. It just does not understand how the technology works at all. And it depends on which one you do, what they say. And this sort of poisons the well, to use the philosophy jargon, you know, just turns people off when the mistake is made. For example, the current age verification stuff, you look into it, there's lots of stuff, people saying, this is going to kill small open source projects, right? And that's true, I agree with them, that's the analysis is correct as far as I'm concerned, you can conclude it or not. And so the side effect of that is tremendous, and that turns people off. So my question is, to you and to the room, what do we do to avoid having the technologists listen to what they would flippantly say, the stupid crap from the outside? Because it is often technologically uninformed, even if it's morally correct, or ethically correct, or even legally correct. If it is simply technologically clueless, it looks like a bad state to be in, and people will ignore you. So what's your advice on how to put the moral panic in the right technological frame?
One of the big advantages, at least that we have in the US, is we have a lot of technologists that sit in policymaking staffs. So at Georgetown, we train technologists to go work with policymakers, and we support policymaking also. So like a good first step would be like get technologists in the policymaking process. But my experience is a bit the opposite in that you go to a tech company and you talk to the lawyer and you're like, hey, we think you guys should do, I'm just gonna make something up, like contextual advertising instead of targeted advertising for this community because it's particularly polarized and is having discriminatory effects. And the lawyers will be like, you are gonna break the internet. Every time. We could not possibly do it. And then if you call a technologist, he's like, ooh, I don't know, that might take us 48 hours. And you're like, what the heck? Okay. So it's funny to hear, I feel like that's kind of the challenge now is actually like getting, to the technologists who I think are like very competent and capable and now have a bubble of lawyers. Same with the researchers now inside tech companies. There's kind of this like lawyerly bubble around them. But yeah, I think that probably the best thing to solve the problem you described is getting more technologists into your policymaking teams. I think that's been really fruitful for us. And we need more of them. But.
Thank you so much for the lecture today. I've learned a lot for sure. My name's Adam, I'm a 3L student here. One of the first things I heard about was this concept of banning infinite scroll and autoplay as a proposal. And I wanted to ask, in reference to the comparison you made towards age verification for pornographic material, one of the fallouts we've seen is that VPNs for technological bypassing, or even the case of youth and young people going to access these materials on less and less reputable sites, and the result of that being taking away from metrics that we can understand where the youth are at and what platforms they're using into these third parties that propagate illicit content, how do we, in the sense of moral panic that we're facing with social media, prevent the same sort of pattern where we overregulate or do these things where infinite scroll is kind of the neutering of the For You page, and would probably result in a similar thing where young people are going to other sources for that content, which then become harder and harder to regulate, much more desegregated. How do we avoid increasing moral panic by overregulating or technologically misappropriating what we can do and what we can actually get done versus what technological restriction and access tech isn't there for?
That is such a great question. It makes me think of 50 different things at once. One is really depressing, and I don't think I believe this, but I have heard it said that basically our kids that are already addicted to social media and pornography is like not who we're building for, which I hate, but it's sort of like when you say, oh, we're gonna build this friction into these things, but these kids are gonna like go around it because they're already addicted to it. The friction works better, like it works, and we've done something else if you're not already addicted. It's sort of like approaching addiction, or like you're preventing someone from becoming an addict. That's like a different policy set up to like how do we help people who are already addicted to these things? And I think that I have a better sense of the sort of setting it up to help prevent or limit, addiction, which I think some of the things that you said would, could and would do. And then what do we do for people that are gonna go to great lengths to get this stuff and to manipulate the technology to meet their needs? I don't think we're gonna solve that problem. Like, I do think that friction is helpful. Like, I think just making anything hard, there's probably a lot of privacy people in this room. Like, friction and making anything a little harder can be the whole, caboodle. But I do think you're totally right that people are absolutely gonna work around whatever you put in place. And I don't think that should necessarily stop it from being put in place, but I do think that at a certain point, you can call it a loss. Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, okay, we gave this a try. Like, this isn't the right structure. It's not working to do the things that we need to do. So I really don't mind at all experimentation in this space. Like, I'm actually even in favor for some of the things that are like, oh, before we do age verification, let's see if we set up, for instance, if Apple's family sharing, if their feet were held to the fire, that parental controls really did what they said they did, or really, were locked in, like maybe that would work well. Like I'm kind of fine in taking some experimental approaches to this, but I think my response to you is like, I think it's okay to like give it a try. You're not going to get everybody, and then at a certain point, you just have to acknowledge failure and pivot and try something else.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Meg, for this amazing lecture. Please join me in thanking our guests.